And now, presenting on stage, The Future of News with Jeff Cohen, Holly Edgell, and Matt Wynn. Moderated by Jessica Fargen Walsh.
I'm Jessica Walsh, and I'm a journalism professor at the College of Journalism and Mass Communications at UNL. Joining me on this panel are Matt Wynn, Executive Director of the Nebraska Journalism Trust. You all know what that is. Holly Edgell, she's the Managing Editor of NPR's Midwest Newsroom, which is a collaborative of NPR stations in Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri. And Jeff Cohen, he's a former editor and reporter and also oversees the media portfolio at Arnold Ventures, and he'll talk a little bit more about what that is a little bit later. I'm the moderator today. I'm also the creator of something called the Nebraska News Map. It's at newsmap.unl.edu. And it's, for the first time, documents every local news organization in the state of Nebraska, as well as where are all of the local journalists in Nebraska working. And you can see that on a map. Some of the findings of that project that looked just at Nebraska is that Nebraska's journalists are stretched thin. A lot of them are covering multiple places, multiple counties. There's also a real lack of professionally produced local news for Spanish speakers in Nebraska outside of Omaha. Think how big our state is. And then finally, there's 9 counties in Nebraska that have no local news organizations, and there's 43,000 Nebraskans who live somewhere where there is no local journalist at all, part-time, full-time, nothing. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're talking about what the future of news is, not just in Nebraska, but around the country. So with that, we're gonna get started. So it's no secret that news is in trouble. And so I want all of our panelists to talk a little bit about what concerns you most about the state of news right now. And I think I'll turn it to Jeff first.
Well, thank you, Jessica. And before being the voice of doom, I do want to say that at Arnold Ventures, I represent John and Laura Arnold in their media portfolio. We are a research-based foundation that kind of views societal problems through the lens of an economist. And we have 95 Flatwater Free Presses in our portfolio. And I wanted to start out on a more upbeat note by saying that of those 95, when you put them on the bell curve, that the Flatwater Free Press is right at the top. And and I've been assured that I can have a couple of minutes at the end to even do a more appropriate commercial for them. But having said that, it is a pretty bleak time for journalism. One of the bright spots is nonprofit journalism. But on the commercial side, you just have, continuing death by 1,000 cuts. And I understand that today the Omaha newspaper did another round of layoffs or a reduction in force. The Atlanta paper said it's going to stop printing the print edition pretty soon. And you're seeing just lack of advertising revenue, circulation revenue that's just exorbitant and makes this actually not a democratic exercise. And then there are other what I would say, we're at a university, but practical, structural, and existential threats to the news business right now. And it kind of starts at the top where the journalists are the enemy of the American people. And at first that was kind of a clever thing, but it's really become that. And things are happening like the defunding of public media, like attacks on reporters that are out doing their jobs covering immigration, like lawsuits against CBS and PBS and failure to comply with open records laws. So, I could go on and on. In fact, I made a pretty good list as we were sitting there, but I'm seeing, I see this every day, and this can affect audiences like you. Certain people are checking out. But I think it's a fight that we take on at our foundation because we see commercial journalism as a market failure. And if we don't go in and support efforts to cover state government, the state government is just not going to get covered anymore. And so philanthropy does play a big role, and I know we'll talk about that a little more.
What do I worry about with this stuff? I worry about the next order of failure. I think journalism is in trouble. We all know that. The numbers speak for themselves. It's a mess. But what does that mean for democracy, right? Those platitudes, those sorts of things that I've said, I'm a journalism nerd. I have been for a really long time. I've said those things over and over and over, but now I'm starting to think about what they really mean. And I think they're true. We need journalism to be that first level of defense. We need journalism. We need journalists to do the kind of unflinching, without fear nor favor, research into our systems, our governance, that sort of thing. We need it. And then we give people the information, they do what they will. Lawmakers, anyone else. That is the highest and best use of journalism. If we're not doing that, if we don't have the capacity to do that, no wonder democracy is on the ropes, right? That's what keeps me up at night. That's the reason that I think, that's part of the reason we do this stuff, besides just being sick in the head.
Speak for yourself. All of the above. I think one of the things that I worry about is that people are getting either no information or incorrect information, relying on, because there is no paper or radio station, they're relying on hearsay, social media, taking deep dives down rabbit holes into things that are not things, that are not real. I guess I have some anger because I feel like I've been around journalism for more than 30 years, and I feel like the legacy media, the legacy commercial media, which still has the largest sort of collective footprint, was not in a mindset to think in an innovative fashion and let events and technology and the audience get in front of it. So therefore, somebody in a town in Nebraska or Iowa that used to have at least a weekly doesn't have anything now. And the big companies continue just to slice away at their sections, their beats, now it's, winnowing down to just a few people in newsrooms. So I carry a lot of resentment to the people who are the deciders when innovation was staring us in the face and did not meet the moment. Not much we can do about that now. I think my frustration continues because I feel like the reaction time is still very slow. The bright spot is nonprofit media. The bright spot is nimble organizations that see the value in trying new things, starting over, making big, bold decisions. That's exciting. We can't do anything about the resentment. I just have to get over it.
Everyone on this panel is either a working journalist or a former journalist, and you can tell we're all very passionate about this topic, and some of the things we're all concerned about are the big picture sort of ideas and threats in terms of how the loss of press freedom and the existence of journalists, how that harms democracy. But also there's a lot of structural issues, particularly in for-profit media, that are of concern. One thing that I think is a bright spot is the increase in collaboration among newsrooms. News organizations used to never collaborate. They used to compete, and now they work together. So I was hoping Holly could talk a little bit about some bright spots that you see in terms of collaboration, and then have Matt talk a little bit about what Flatwater's doing.
Sure. Well, I'll give you a couple of definitions of what I see as promising collaboration and so there's pure content exchange, which is the Flatwater Free Press allows me to publish something that they've published as long as I credit them, and they do. Their work is published on Nebraska Public Media's news pages. And then there's the other kind of collaboration, which is building coverage together, which my team now is doing with the Flatwater Free Press. We're working on an investigation involving Lincoln. And so those are some of the very general models. But like Jill said, journalists are competitive. They don't like to share. They think there's something diminishing about even a shared byline within their own newsroom. So imagine when you're saying, hey, we're going to work with da-da-da-da. But I say collaboration is a superpower, and it's kind of my catchphrase now because it's the best way I can describe to explain how there's this thing that we have, there's a force that we have when we do things together that we cannot do by ourselves. I think that we overlook opportunities to, through collaboration, be in more than one place at the same time, because one news organization that has one politics reporter cannot do that. I live in the state of Missouri. The two largest NPR stations in Missouri collaborate on state government coverage. There was a special session. Our main state house reporter was on her honeymoon. Well, guess what? There's a station reporter at another station who goes in and does that work. So to me, the idea that we sort of sit and stand on the old way of, no, we're not sharing, and we're not collaborating is, again, another fail. And from my standpoint, I actually came from commercial media into public media, and it's harder to get a commercial outlet to collaborate with a nonprofit than you would think, because we're not their competition, but they still see us as their competition, right? So I think that whether you're doing just a content sharing thing to bring both audiences more news, or you're actually collaborating in the field from the ground up on a project, these are two things that it doesn't take much to do. You can do it right now. You can do it tomorrow. Call me, I love to collaborate. But I really think that we overlook opportunities when we say, no, that's our competition, or no, that's not what we've done. And that's really an underlying problem with journalism, is that we're trying to do what we've always done, and that's not working.
Preach. And speaking of, that is why the Nebraska Journalism Trust. Sometimes I get questions about, why would you do this umbrella thing instead of just one publication? That's why. Because this has to be an ecosystem problem. We cannot be so myopic as to think that we can solve it with any one publication. Now, by the same token, I think Flatwater is awesome. It is the best thing. It is the investigative work. It needs to be centered in any journalism ecosystem. But its superpowers, collaboration is infused. If we have journalists who are given the time, who have the talent, who have the capacity to do really, my favorite word, revelatory reporting about this place that we are, and we kind of open source that, if we make that accessible to reporters across the state, if we make that accessible to partners in other newsrooms, if we use, by our powers combined, we can be greater than we've ever been before. And this, there's a couple of different versions of that. It also comes down to real walk the walk stuff. This year we are in a position which is so wild. This is crazy. We are partnering with the New York Times. Yin-Chi Shu is working on a project there with Dean Baquet, our speaker tonight. We had Dean and Jeff come by the office today and talk about collaborations that they're seeing around the world, or around the country rather. We're partnering with ProPublica. There was a session earlier about the legacy of lead in Omaha. We've got a couple reporters that are teaming up with ProPublica to look at what's up with our Superfund site. What lead is left in our soil? Did we really clean it up? That's going to make us stronger and better. We're working with Holly's team. Just last week we did a story in partnership with the Lincoln Journal-Star, a for-profit newspaper in Lincoln, but you know what? They're cool. Those reporters are cool. We like working with them. They make us better, and it's fun along the way. I think if you infuse collaboration into this stuff, that leads to a good thing, and I think we've shown that.
Yeah, one of the sort of bright spots, one of the good things that we see happening as a result, sadly, of there not being enough journalists, that's really sort of what I think one of the reasons that has forced collaboration is that there's not enough journalists as there used to be. And thinking also about sustainability, what that really comes down to is money, and are people paying for your news? Are foundations and other big donors supporting you and your news efforts? And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Arnold Ventures is a nonprofit based in Texas that, among other things, supports reporting around 3 areas: investigative journalism, state capitals, and single subject websites. Jeff, can you talk a little bit about the role of philanthropy to support news? And do you think a nonprofit news model has become too reliant on sort of big philanthropy, big donors?
Yes. But Arnold Ventures also is into criminal justice reform, healthcare cost containment. We fight big pharma on things like insulin pricing, all kinds of drug pricing. We are in contraceptive access around the country, trying to change various state laws. We work on public pensions and finance. It's a very siloed philanthropy that John and Laura Arnold run. But if those are your first issues, they believe that journalism should be your second issue, and that it is essential then for philanthropy to step up to the plate and fund the three lanes of journalism that you were talking about. So your second question was like, are these news organizations too reliant on it? The fact is that they are, in the nonprofit space, almost all of them have 50% of their revenue from institutional philanthropy. Then, it's members, large donors, and then some earned revenue, events like this, some subscription newsletters. But the other thing is that this is all somewhat of a nascent, less than 10-year-old industry, and it's finding its way. So my pitch to the funders, to my funders, is that we have to be in there. One of the leaders in this space was a guy named John Thornton, and he founded the American Journalism Project and the Texas Tribune. And his view was that philanthropy is going to have to be there till the bitter end. Is that true? I don't know. I mean, some of my most successful grants have been to places like at Stanford, where they stand up database projects, and after 3 years, they're getting enough subscribers that we can get out. But I really do think that in the more grassroots places, that philanthropy is going to hang in there with the Flatwater Free Press.
And I would say that's okay. I mean, sometimes when people have this conversation, I know that none of us are them, but, well, can you support a newsroom through philanthropy? I don't know. Can you support a ballet through philanthropy? Like, we do this as a society. This isn't like we just made this up. This works. It works for hundreds of years. There's nothing fundamentally flawed or that we have to believe there's an end. Now, does Arnold Ventures need to be there to the end? Probably not. We count that as, that's fabulous. That's fantastic. But that is not something that we count on 15 years down the road, anything like that. But I do think it can last. I do think philanthropy can be part of the answer. If philanthropy cares about we just had the panel. Philanthropy cares about this place. And if journalism is this place talking to itself, well, then philanthropy cares about journalism too. You talking about journalism being the second order issue. Who wouldn't say that? I think sometimes we get caught up too much in our own heads, worried about what this looks like in the future and can this last. Yes, 1,000 times yes.
I think as in our own sort of household budgets, if we can have many income streams, that's kind of a good thing, right? I think if philanthropy is a big chunk of your budget, but you have all these different donors, you have subscribers, you have underwriters. One of the interesting things about public media is that some of the bigger member stations, like my station, which is KCUR in Kansas City, and St. Louis Public Radio, their loss in the recent rescission vote was a very small part of their budget. They had to fundraise for 1 week to fill that gap. So they fundraised for 1 week and filled that gap from people who were calling in, viewers like you, right? Listeners like you for a tote bag. And that's mind-blowing, right? So both of those big stations are okay for the next fiscal year. What happens after that is a worry, because can we rely on that every year? Probably not. The grant that funded the Midwest Newsroom, the big grant, we have 2 pockets of money, came via NPR from the Wendy and Eric Schmid Family Foundation. And Mr. Schmid was a Google guy early on, and Wendy used to be a journalist. So they care about journalism, they care about the Midwest. Right now I'm worried about that, even though that money lasts till 2027, that's not that far off. But KCUR gets big bunches of money like that from philanthropists. The Kauffman Foundation recently started sunsetting their support of journalism. They were a funder of us. And so we can't just rely on philanthropy. So the smaller stations in Missouri have a bigger problem because they did rely mostly on that money that was cut and did not have a lot of philanthropy. So right now you're hearing about this. Small stations in Alaska are probably going to close. Small stations in the middle of smaller rural areas are probably going to close because the mix wasn't there, and I don't know what the solution to that is because philanthropists want to put their money in a place where it will make a difference, and we need to tell the story of where that money is needed as news organizations.
We'll circle back to this if we have time in terms of thinking about the sort of argument you need to make to foundations and to funders to put money into journalism projects that might be serving an audience that can't financially support them, or it can be kind of difficult to, not every news organization can be successful. They need the audience to support them, so we'll maybe come back and talk about that at the end if we have time. Because we have talked a lot about the issues and challenges facing journalism today, but I wanted each of you to talk about some of the things that make you hopeful or some sort of success stories that you've seen. You're all in nonprofit journalism. So I think we'll maybe start with Jeff, and you can talk a little bit about some of the sort of bright spots or success stories that that Arnold Ventures has funded.
Well, I'm a longtime journalist, so I only see glasses half empty. I can't work with you on the success. No, that is a joke, and I got a little bit of a laugh there. But so I want to get to that audience thing real quick because I look at audience in this way. I mean, some stories you write as an editorial page writer for an audience of one. You know, some you write for a geographic audience. Some you write for a more mass audience. But why audience is important and why we measure our audience of all of the 95 grantees that I talked about is that if they're getting audience, they have a higher chance of getting money. And so, you know, that's what we want, is we want them to be able to do impactful stories that make people say, this is valuable to me, I'm going to pay for it. Okay, so if I have to talk about success, I only have to look to my right. And, you know, despite all those problems that I laid out earlier, if you look at the Flatwater Free Press and you look at its work on the parole board in Nebraska, you know, where people, I'm going to give me, like, I live in Texas, so I'm maybe about 90% right here, but where the parole board isn't showing up to do its job and people are languishing in prison. Is that fair, Matt? Okay, so that's impact because that changed. Or that there are nitrates being spilled, including on one farm that was owned by the governor, right? And the laws changed. So, you know, that is success journalistically and impact. And if you look at their stories this week on, you know, people dying in solitary confinement, I mean, it was just horrific reading. You know, I mean, anyway, I don't want to get all worked up about it, but, you know, people die in prison, and there will be change. So that, to me, is success, as with big J journalism. But then you see this guy going around the state and talking to various communities, both Republicans and Democrats, and getting them to understand the mission of this organization. That, too, is the kind of success a philanthropy is looking for in order to continue its funding.
I think, yes. Give Matt his flowers, and the other Matt. I think of success in a lot of ways because I lead a collaboration of 4 stations. So I think of success as if the work that we're producing from the Midwest Newsroom is building the capacity of their newsrooms to do investigative journalism. So that is one success. The other success is like what Jeff was talking about, impact on making change and impacting lives. I have 2 success stories. That one is local here and one is national. So the Marshall Project they focus on criminal justice stories. They started as on a national scale, but now they have 3 local newsrooms. They have a newsroom in Cleveland, they have a newsroom in Jackson, Mississippi, and they just had they opened one in St. Louis. To me, that is a mark of success. So what do they do in these local communities? They partner. So through the Midwest Newsroom, one of our partners is St. Louis Public Radio. We worked with the Marshall Project collectively on an investigation, 2 reporters working together on a story. And I think that right there, the whole experience to me was a success, not just because it also did get a lot of reach and it got a lot of engagement. Don't know if it's going to change any laws, but who knows. But it also sort of just showed me and reminded me that superpower thing I'm talking about. Right? They needed our local knowledge and our collaboration. We brought them the story. We loved the reach that we got through their networks. The Kansas City Star republished our whole story. That's never happened, to anyone from St. Louis, probably. What the heck? That was a shocker. So that's a great model. There's a model closer to home that you may not have heard about, but people were really upset when the Omaha Reader and El Perico seemed to be going the way of many publications, but those 2 publications have been acquired by Nebraska Public Media over in Lincoln. They are up and running. They have preserved the archive. El Perico publishes in Spanish, and you can translate it into English. There is a full-time reporter for the Omaha Reader, and they're working with a lot of other freelancers. That's funded by a grant, that reporter. But I hope to see more great things. They just started doing this. And so what happens is that the content from El Perico and Omaha Reader gets a bigger platform on Nebraska Public Media's platforms, and Nebraska Public Media, which is a truly statewide network, can do more for the audience, right? Again, proving their worth over and over again to the audience. And they're training this newspaper reporter how to do radio. How great is that? So that's, again, another radio voice. So I think that to me is also success, because that is taking something that people loved and relied on, bringing it back, not focusing on breaking news, on fires, on ability, but like systemic issues, systemic problems, and really trying to help and figure out the audience, really. Who is the audience in Omaha today that would like our work, and how does that fit in with the whole network of Nebraska Public Media? So to me, those are 2 examples.
I am so bad at taking compliments, but thank you. God. Success. When we started this thing, I had the idea that if we hired the best journalist that I ever worked with, who was sitting right there, Matthew Hansen, and just kind of let him do his thing, that would probably work. And it did. It did. But then we've repeated that. I'm getting dangerously close to the point where I'm probably not going to be able to say Matthew's the best I ever worked with, because we've got a whole room full of them. Sorry. Yeah. Whatever. Good job. That feels tremendous, and it's working, and we do have that kind of feedback loop. We are resonating with an audience. We are reaching an audience. God, I worked at this, I don't know, this might be libelous. I worked at USA Today for a while, and that's a huge thing with massive reach and all these sorts of things. But there were times I would do a story, and, who read it? My mom. Thanks, Mom. But just the numbers were just pathetic at a national publication with national reach. We can we can count page views. We can see what we're doing with an army of people whose job it is to make it reach the biggest audience possible. When I worked at the World Herald, I thought I had the biggest bullhorn in the state of Nebraska that I would ever get. Here at the Nebraska Journal and Trust, the work we're doing, we do a story and it dwarfs the numbers that I was doing at any of those other places. We have built from scratch with kind of our true north compass, the thing we wanted to build, and it's working. That's success. That feels good. I also want to call out that we are not, this is not rare, unique. This is not a anomaly. There is someone who shall remain nameless in this room who is working and scheming to start a local thing in Nebraska, a new local news outlet in a small town in Nebraska that desperately needs it. And she's not alone. That would be, as near as I can tell, the third or fourth one that is starting to take root, take shape. Like, we're going to see these little green shoots growing up. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does journalism. Something is going to take this space. You can't fight it. It's going to work. And watching that happen is just invigorating.
Yeah, so when I was doing the research and really sort of reporting for the Nebraska News Map, I also came across some sort of, I guess, inspiring stories or different things that I saw happening around the state in terms of ways that people were getting local news to people. And one of them, Matt and I have talked about before, is a woman in York named Melanie who worked for the York News Times for 25 years, lost her job, and didn't just, sort of go into retirement or go work somewhere else. She started her own for-profit, hyper-local digital news site, and she's making a living covering news in York and York County in a really comprehensive way. And I really hope that we see more Nebraskans starting up local news organizations that serve their community. And so that was a really bright spot. I also came across small town newspaper owners who were trying to, re-envision what a small town newspaper could be. It's not just a piece of paper that shows up in your mailbox. And yes, in a lot of small towns in Nebraska, your newspaper is delivered to your mailbox, and it costs a lot of money for your local newspaper to do that. But local newspapers can be so much more than that. This newspaper in Stapleton now has like a little bar/speakeasy in the back of the newspaper office because it's really, the owners
We have
are trying,
that too,
yeah, trying to, sort of like think of themselves as a community resource and not, a piece of paper that, tells you what's going on. It can be so much more than that. So that's a little bit in terms of like thinking about some of the things that can be the future of news. And so we have a little bit of extra time. So I was wanting to know if each of you could talk a little bit about what you are thinking about in terms of the future of news. And I might maybe start with you, Holly, because you were talking about how you would like to see news organizations be, more nimble or more quick to evolve with technology. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of maybe what you hope for or what you would like to see.
Sure, thank you. I think that one of the things that is great about starting a news organization now is that you have very little overhead. If you are just starting, you don't have to have a printing press. Guess what? Those things cost millions of dollars. You also can focus on a single subject. If that's something that you really care about. I met some people last week. Their whole news organization is all about the Salt Lake, the Great Salt Lake, because it's in trouble. And that's all they do. And they have philanthropic funding and member funding. But I think, and this is maybe terrible to say, but when a newspaper says they're not going to print paper anymore, I feel like, well, yeah. Yes, it's sad, but platforms have changed since the beginning. Because the first person stood on a corner and said, "Hear ye," and held up a piece of paper to read the news. Our platforms have changed. Journalism and news doesn't change. Well, it has kind of, but you know what I mean. The information is still there, but we're getting it in different ways. So I feel like a big organization coming to their senses and saying, we cannot sustain delivering papers to your mailbox anymore. It is sad, yes. And it's going to maybe allow that newspaper, which is a great newspaper, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, to do more for the audience, because the audience is going to find them on multiple platforms, already has, and so let's move on. So I think this is sort of the nimble thing I'm talking about that's so hard for big companies to think. It's not even nimble, it's just, it makes economic sense. If you can save jobs, reporter jobs, by stopping printing the newspaper and maybe selling the press to a museum or something, then let's do that, right? And then the nimble part I love about where I sit is that I am within a legacy media, if you think about public media as legacy media. However, because we are a nonprofit and because we are not supported by advertising, we can be nimble. We can do things differently, and that's why the Midwest Newsroom exists. I mean, we're just trying things and trying to do things differently, and so I think that is the key. We can't wait another 100 years for the next evolution. It's already happening, and journalists have to think about that. We're not used to it. We're not used to thinking about our existence, right, and how we're going to live. We're used to just doing the stories, but we have to think about sustainability, and so yeah.
Well, what I hope happens with the future of news is that it continues to be a voice for the voiceless, just as it was in the stories that I described that you did. So that's my hope. But I'm a pessimist, so. On the bad side, I think you're going to see, and I watched a little bit of that panel before us. I'm not sure where artificial intelligence is going to take it and how owner-operators are going to use this to tell news stories. That is a whole nother panel, okay? That's a worry. I could also say AI is a big hope, too. We are funding a project with Cal Matters that uses AI to dissect what's being told in state capitol meeting rooms and then write reports that tip reporters. That's a good use of AI. I think that also on the bad side is the continued kind of hyper-partisan publications. That is very worrisome, as we all learned last week and as we saw the coverage of the events of last week. And that, if history repeats itself, and it does, Henry Cisneros, the longtime mayor of San Antonio, used to always come into the editorial board and say that. But, we started out with the partisan press, and I worry that could happen again. But on the good side, we just don't, you don't, first of all, you don't know. I mean, it changes 10 minutes from now. This could all be bad. But I think that, there's going to be consolidation and collaboration. I think that there's going to be, your business, which I don't know enough about just to be dangerous, but I think it's going to get better because of these cuts. It's going to force innovation in distribution, and I'm really kind of looking forward to that as a funder, because the funding things you talked about are Band-Aids, and Band-Aids don't really help. There needs to be something permanent, so I think nonprofit news will ultimately win. And finally, I think that every American over the age of 16 very soon will have their own podcast.
That's not a positive thing. God. Positive things. I think AI is scary. Some of this stuff is scary. But I think people talk about this nonprofit thing. You say it's going to be the answer, and I agree. When people say, what is this fad? What are we talking about here? No. This is such a better way to do it. When I've had jobs where a publisher would come downstairs and say, hey, our advertiser, the company that does the grocery ads, didn't like your headline, so we're not going to do that anymore. How is that better? How is that better than funding it with, hey, you like what we're doing? Please give us some money. Hey, you like what we're doing? Please give us some money. That is it's finally about the journalism. It is not about capturing some audience. This isn't about hacking some audience. I think that's a good thing. I think even more to kind of my earlier point about fears of democracy and stuff, the for-profit media got hacked. We are partisan and divided and polarized, not by some accident, but because, they led the media astray, and we end up in this weird world that we live in right now, the upside down. Going local, this nonprofit thing where we're very focused on Omaha, where we're focused on Lincoln, I'm not really talking about whatever Donald Trump did yesterday. Unless it really impacts Nebraska, I don't care as an organization. Unless it's about Nebraska, DC Corps got that. You've got it. You can find that any 100 of different ways we deal with what's in Nebraska. That's our job, and we're going to do it the best way we can. I think this leads to a better society. I think this is where we need to be. I think there's nothing but promise there. I'll also point out, and I know we're running out of time here, but Jessica mentioned Melanie in York, and I know Matthew loves when I talk about her, because I just don't shut up. Part of the reason I don't shut up is she's in a town of 8,000 people. She willed this website into an existence. It has a staff of 1. Her name's Melanie. The website's just Melanie. And she's reaching 17,000 readers a month. Well, that's more than the population of the place. Any outfit in America would be thrilled to have that kind of penetration. And it's happening organically right here in Nebraska. We've got something good here, and I think we're going to leverage that.
Well, that's all we have on the future of news. We'll bring our crystal balls next time. But no, we really appreciate seeing all these people here. And I think one thing that I think about a lot when I do think about the future of news is the sort of evolution of how news organizations view the people who consume or read or view their news. And I think also, I think it's really sort of encouraging when you see more and more people stepping up and being willing to fund and pay for local news, whether it's $10 a month or through philanthropy. So I think that's also encouraging as well, and we'll leave it with that. So.
All right. I'm going to give the mic to Matthew real quick while we exit.
Thank you so much for coming today. I know some of you are joining us this evening. Doors open at the Hewitt Luminarium at 5. Happy hour kind of really starts at 5:30. The band starts and that sort of thing, so show up at your leisure. That's all I was supposed to say, but I'll say one other thing, which is that for the past 2 years, we've sold out Flatfest, and right now, so this year, the Hewitt Luminarium, this is the most tickets we've sold. It's 350 capacity. We've sold 348 tickets. So if somebody here wants to buy 2 tickets and sell out Flatfest, the first one to find me and tell me that will go on the honor system, and we'll be able to say it's a sellout for the 3rd year in a row. Again, thank you so much for coming. It's so cool to do this and have you guys be participants in this thing we call journalism and democracy as Nebraskans. So thanks a lot, and we'll do it again soon.